The movie starts with Julia and Gabriel's journey into marital bliss. After leaving Toronto, Gabriel is now a professor at Cambridge, and Julia is in grad school at Harvard. After many trials and tribulations that their relationship faced, Julia and Gabriel are finally happily in love, and their marriage seems near perfect. Gabriel supports Julia while she busies herself with working on grad school and getting a PhD. Between all the stressful days, stolen moments of intimacy, and love between them keep their marriage smooth and running. After one such spontaneous moment in their garden, Gabriel gifts Julia a pendant and tells her about his desire to have a baby. Julia is surprised by this, and while she doesn't say no, she just tells him it's too soon for a baby. They've only been married for 6 months, and Julia is still young and in grad school. She wants to focus on her life. Gabriel understands and assures her that he isn't in any rush. Whenever she is ready, he'll be ready. But his desire has more of an impact on Julia than she thought. That night, she wakes restless from a nightmare that she wasn't allowed to take her exam because she had a baby with her. Julia composes herself and tries to not let this get to her. In the morning, Julia stresses about the sleepless night she had and all the preparations she has to do before Gabriel's family comes to visit. But the loving man that he is, Gabriel assures her that he'll take care of everything and asks her to get some rest. The day passes, and Julia gets so immersed in her work that she even forgets to eat. Later, when Gabriel points that out, Julia tells him she ran into some trouble with her paper. Gabriel offers to help her, but Julia strictly disagrees. She doesn't want her paper to sound like Gabriel wrote it. After all, he was her professor not long ago, and is 10 years her senior. She worries that people like Krista are already spreading rumors about her credibility. Gabriel assures her that Krista is just jealous of Julia's success. Reassured, Julia tells him that he can read her paper soon, but her take on it is different from Gabriel's. Gabriel promises to be honest about his opinions, but also supportive. However, the reality is far different. When he finally reads her paper that she will be presenting at a conference at Oxford University, Gabriel is anything but supportive. In her paper, Julia has opposed Gabriel's arguments and has chosen to take a different approach from him, discrediting his entire research. This throws him off, and Gabriel is livid. Julia tries to defend her work, claiming to want to have her own individual ideas instead of going along with the herd, but to no avail. The two get into a round of verbal snaps, and Julia is hurt and angry about the lack of support from Gabriel's side. Julia demands to be left alone and locks herself in the bathroom, leaving Gabriel to prepare for his family's arrival while she takes some time to cool off. Later, Gabriel greets his adoptive family and welcomes them. His sister and Julia's best friend, Rachel, senses some tension in the house and goes looking for Julia. She finds her in the study. Rachel asks Julia about the matter, and Julia confesses how Gabriel rained on her parade, like the condescending ass he is. Luckily for Julia, Rachel is her best friend first, sister-in-law second. She takes her side and berates Gabriel's ways. When Julia tells Rachel about Gabriel's desire to start a family, Rachel's anger at her brother flees. She is ecstatic about it and tells Julia that she and her husband are also planning for a baby soon. Because if losing her mother to cancer taught her anything, it is that life is way too uncertain to wait around. Rachel gets emotional reminiscing about Gabriel's initial days with their family when he was newly adopted. He was a sad and quiet kid, worried he'd be sent away sooner or later. Hearing this breaks Julia's heart and melts her anger just a little bit. Dinner that night is an awkward affair, with the tension between Julia and Gabriel thick as the gravy on the table. When Julia gets up and leaves abruptly, Gabriel's father talks sense into him, giving him imperative marital advice to be gentle to his wife, who was hurt by his words. His advice finally takes when Gabriel, after letting Julia spend the night in the study, comes to his senses the next morning and apologizes for his outburst. The two talk out their differences, finally kissing and making up in their bed. These are two academians whose pillow talk involves discussing Julia's paper. The mighty Gabriel even admits that her paper managed to change his mind, at the risk of disagreeing with his own work. Happily made up, the married couple hosts their families later that evening, where Julia finds out that her father's girlfriend is seeking her blessing to take their relationship forward, and Julia gladly gives it to her. She later has a conversation with Gabriel's father, where she realizes how much the old man misses living in this house, where he spent years of bliss with his late wife, Grace. Julia extends her courtesy to the man and kindly invites him to move back in. That is something for the man to consider. Later, while fetching her bubble bath from the guest bathroom for Julia, Gabriel sees a pregnancy test discarded on the floor. When he brings it up to Julia, she claims that it isn't hers, but maybe Rachel's. Gabriel grumblingly wishes it was Julia's instead, but when he sees the worried look on her face, he pulls back the reins and decides to just enjoy that moment with Julia. He gets into the bath with her, and the two spend some romantic moments together. Soon, the long anticipation ends, and Julia and Gabriel arrive in London for their conference. They are put up at the hostel rooms, and while Gabriel hates the rooms, Julia is enamored by the prospect of being in the same place as C.S. Lewis when he got inspired by the statues in the Garden garden to write the famous Narnia books. Though she worries that people at the conference might ask questions about why Gabrielle left Toronto. And more than that, she worries about the rumors her arch-nemesis, Krista, has been spreading about the two of them. But Gabrielle's unwavering support and belief in her calms Julia's nerves. The next day, it's evident just how excited Julia is to be one step closer to her dreams, and Gabrielle doesn't hold back while expressing how proud he is of her. But when there's too much happiness, there's usually something bad lurking around the corner. And in this story, it comes dressed like temptation, jealousy, and desperation all in one, wearing the face of Krista Peterson. When Krista corners Julia and Gabrielle at the conference, she has nothing but bitterness dripped in fake confidence to offer them. Still jealous of Julia and Gabrielle's love, Krista takes shots at Julia's reputation by publicly hinting that the other woman must have slept with who knows how many professors at Harvard to get to show her paper at the conference. This boils Gabrielle's blood, and despite Julia's protests, he steps in to stand up for his wife. But Krista remains unfazed by his outburst, and takes a shot at Gabrielle's reputation by reminding everyone about his messy departure from the University of Toronto. Caught up in their back and forth, Julia feels utterly embarrassed, and tries to take Gabrielle away when Professor Catherine Picton enters the scene. When Krista tries to jump the gun and impress the lady by introducing herself, Professor Picton doesn't stand for it. She isn't too impressed by Krista's wily charms, and refuses to acknowledge her as someone other than a student who attends Columbia. Krista's professor, Professor Paxiani, tries to speak for her, but Picton dismisses him. Aware of the havoc Krista wreaked in Toronto, Picton warns her to follow the rules of decorum here, or else she'll have her thrown out. After embarrassing Krista in front of everyone, Picton turns to Julia with a smile, and invites her for drinks later that evening. When all is done, Julia turns to Gabrielle, upset by the show he put on. She wanted him to stop and walk away, and not fight her battles for her. Her anger confuses Gabrielle as she walks away from him. But they eventually make up with each other, each apologizing for their behavior, passing notes like teenagers at the conference. At drinks with Catherine, Julia finds out a rather scandalous truth about the professor from her heyday. Catherine tells her that when she was a student, she was involved with one of her married professors, and had also been a subject of ugly rumors where her credibility as a researcher and academician was questioned and put to the test by her peers and professors. She advises Julia to be more academically assertive, and to not let her husband defend her, because chivalry in academia is non-existent. This leaves Julia with more thoughts to ponder. On the other hand, Krista, the queen of hypocrisy, is sleeping with Professor Paxiani. Not that she's attached to him or anything. Their situation seems to be a physical transaction and nothing more. She even tells him that she'll need the room to herself the next night, and the wicked look on her face clearly tells she's got a plan brewing in her mind's cauldron. Paxiani warns her to be careful in her pursuit of revenge, because she doesn't want to make an enemy out of Professor Picton. It would make things difficult. The next morning, it is the day for Julia's lecture. She's equal parts excited and terrified, and Gabrielle holds her hand through the jitters. When Krista sees Gabrielle at the conference, she attempts to tempt him into sleeping with him. But Gabrielle's had enough of her, and warns her to stop her obnoxious agenda against him and his wife, or else he will sue her. Krista challenges him, bringing up his past mistakes yet again, and shamelessly hands him her card with her hotel address on it, inviting him to her room later that night. But Gabrielle strictly refuses her. When Gabrielle sees Julia with her old flame-turned-good friend Paul, who obviously still has a thing for Julia even now, he gets a little jealous. We see how being in Julia and Gabrielle's presence still makes Paul uncomfortable. Later, Julia gets cornered by Krista, who does what she does best, yap nonsense. Krista tries to instigate Julia by saying that she will never be enough for Gabrielle and his voracious sexual appetite, and that she has nothing to offer to the man that can keep him interested in her long enough. Krista wonders what Gabrielle even sees in Julia, and suggests that he might have already cheated on her by now. While Krista's words do hurt her, Julia can pack an equally strong punch. She tells him that what she has with Gabrielle is something far more precious and stronger than a random woman's voraciousness, and that is love. She proclaims to have loved Gabrielle since she was all but 17. And while all the other women's interests only lie in what's outside of him, Julia has loved every light and dark part of him, and that is why he chose her. Julia warns Krista to do her worst, but she knows that all of Krista's attempts to seduce Julia's husband will fail. But before she leaves her gaping in astonishment, Julia tells Krista that the woman is right about Gabrielle's voracious appetite. He has quite a big one, and the only woman enjoying the pleasures of his adventurous self for the rest of his life will be his dear wife. Lunch with Paul is a little awkward, but soon, Julia falls into a comfortable rhythm with her old friend. As they talk about their lives, Paul avoids discussing his love life with her and asks Julia more about her program. Julia tells him that though she's working all the time, she loves it. However, there's one speed bump in her married life. She tells Paul about Gabrielle's desire to start a family soon, while she wants to finish her program before she takes on the role of a mother. Though Julia tells him that Gabrielle is supportive of her decision, she's worried about making him wait that long. Paul jumps to conclusions, thinking that Gabriel's not being a supportive husband and is neglecting the incredible woman he married. He tells Julia that it's hard for him to see her with Gabriel, who doesn't realize her worth. Julia instantly defends her husband, saying that he would give her the world if he could fit it in his pocket. It's not Gabriel who is struggling, it's her. She doesn't want to withhold giving Gabriel a child when she knows how happy it'll make him. She assures Paul that she is truly happily married. Later that day, it is finally Julia's time to show her paper. She gets on stage and defends her paper with confidence and vigor. Her arguments are loved by everyone in the room, and as she goes on, it is evident just how proud Gabriel is of his wife. In the end, Julia is applauded by everyone present, and when it's time for her to take questions, the dreaded thing happens. Krista tries to discredit Julia's research by claiming that it is filled with plot holes. As nervous as Krista's attack makes her, Julia keeps her calm and responds to her questions with confidence, reclaiming the credibility of her paper with her answers. Gabriel and Professor Picton are both proud of her, and this embarrasses Krista. Julia comes out the other end a winner. While everyone celebrates her success, Gabriel steps out for air, where he is approached by Paul. The tension between the two men is as thick as Gabriel's fabulous eyebrows. Paul tells him that Picton wants Gabriel to be an external reader on his dissertation, and wonders bitterly if Gabriel would consider that, which Gabriel says he'll think about. But that's not the end of it. Paul confronts Gabriel about the rumors he heard while at UCLI, saying that Julia slept with him to get into Harvard. Gabriel discredits them, saying that those rumors were Krista's doing, and for that she will be dealt with. Paul doesn't hold his tongue when he tells Gabriel that he doesn't deserve Julia, and this marks the end of Gabriel's patience with the guy. He doesn't disagree with the man, because he knows just how grateful he is to wake up next to Julia every morning. He can only hope to God that he will someday be worthy of a woman like Julia, and until then, he will spend each day of their lives trying his hardest to live up to that. Gabriel tells him he knows Paul wants Julia, but he can never have her. Paul claims that he loves Julia, and she is the one for him, but Gabriel has already claimed her as his wife. The bitter reality is a hard pill for Paul to swallow, but he's made his peace with it already, despite knowing the kind of man Gabriel once was. Gabriel admits that he was a bad person who broke Julia's heart one too many times in the past, but he is no longer that man. Paul finds it hard to take Gabriel's word for it, but what choice does he have? He's just a lovesick man for unrequited love as the trope of his story. He tells Gabriel that he can't be friends with Julia anymore, because it's time for him to move on. Seeing the true concern on Paul's face, Gabriel admits that Julia will be heartbroken to lose Paul as her friend. He apologizes to Paul for having misjudged him, and the two men part ways. Before he leaves, Paul warns Gabriel to never break Julia's heart again. That night, Gabriel gifts Julia a Cartier watch, and along with that, he promises to support her no matter what as she finishes up grad school. Julia feels a burden being lifted off her shoulders. After spending a few blissful hours with each other, Julia finally tells Gabriel about what Krista told her earlier, about his adventurous appetite and whatnot. Though she runs their conversation through him, Julia worries she might not please Gabriel entirely. Gabriel assures her that the response she gave Krista was the holy truth for him, and his only concern is to please her and find his pleasure with her. Although he'd be willing to explore some adventures with her, if that is what she wants to. But he assures her that he will never ever abandon her if she decides to say no, leaving the choice entirely up to her. Julia is relieved by his words, and her worries melt away. Later, Gabriel rips up Krista's card and throws away it for good. Meanwhile, little miss up to no good Krista waits for Gabriel to knock on her door while dressed in a promiscuous outfit. But an ugly shock awaits her on the other side of the door. Professor Paxiani enters the room and smacks her across the face for going against his warning. The room drowns in Krista's screams for help as the man physically. Hours later, scared and badly injured, Krista escapes the room on her tiptoes, while her assailant lies asleep on the bed. While wandering the halls of a museum, Gabriel and Julia steal moments for themselves. However, worry gnaws away at Julia, as she still thinks she's standing in the way of Gabriel's dreams of starting a family. Gabriel puts her mind at ease, telling her that they can discuss their future freely without changing their timelines. Julia relaxes. Gabriel tells her that he's taking care of the Krista matter, and soon she will be sent a cease and desist letter by Columbia University for all the slander she spread. Back at Columbia, Krista receives the letter, and though it's an inconvenience, she already has an agenda of her own. She enters the department chair's office to talk about Professor Paxiani.